I'm creating a sample deployment.
Create. You can create and they're not create.
Yeah, and so I created a deployment, and right now, like it says, I'll show how my deployment is. So this is a sample deployment. It's an experimental object. It says that create 3 Nginx pods. So, and when I did get deployments, this is what it showed me. That right now it's updated. It has to update 3. And right now it's at 0. So it'll just keep. So in the background, what is happening is there's a deployment controller running, which will see that a new deployment has come, and it will try to create an RC for it, and then scale that RC to 3 pods. So that deployment actually runs 1 in 30 seconds. So it will see whenever in 30 seconds it will see this deployment, and will start creating pods it will first create an RC and then create pods for this. So here we can see it created this RC, and it named it deployment RC and a hash, and it set the replicas to 3, and soon we'll see new pods will come up as well.
Does that mean that we're not running, we're not watching?
No, so right now we're not watching, it's Poland. We'll change it to that. So now we see it says that I've updated I have 3 updated replicas. So this was simple, it just created new pods, but we can like scale down existing pods and bring up new pods of different types. So let's say I want to change Nginx pods to Redis pod. So I'll create my current deployment. Oh, sorry, I'll delete my current deployment. And create this new one. There's a better way to edit it, which Janet will show in a while. But this is, I'll just delete and recreate.
So deleting it doesn't actually delete.
Yeah, so it orphans the RCs.
It orphans the RCs, but it doesn't actually.
So it's like pausing the.
Is there a stop? Did we implement stop for deployment?
No.
Yeah. Are we
before it goes out of experimental, we'll probably make it delete the RCs by default, and then provide a way to orphan them.
So now what it will do
in the controller?
Yes.
As opposed to stop, which is
yes.
Classic.
Yeah.
So now we see that it created a new RC for Redis, and it's set to 0 replicas right now, and the old one is at 3. So now it will start scaling up the new RC and scaling down the old RC. So the way it works is there are two main parameters, max surge and max unavailability, which are 1 by default.
Sorry, Joe's saying that. Is anyone else having trouble with audio, or is it just Joe?
I think he had the issue with the sound.
No, it's working fine for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely working.
All right, Joe.
So right now what it's doing is it's scaling up the Redis RC and scaling down the Nginx RC. So it'll first scale up the Nginx to 1 and scale up Redis to 1 and scale down Nginx to 1, and then scale up Redis to 3 and scale down Nginx to 0. So we can see what's the current state. Oh, sorry, I deleted it. I wanted to.
So, and the other reason to orphan is that if you want to pause the rolling update, the way you do that right now is by deleting it, and then it stops doing stuff.
Okay.
Right, like if you were doing kubectl rolling update, you would Control C, and it would stop doing stuff.
Right. The Control C is actually. We should probably make kubectl at least. We should, if we make kubectl rolling update use deployment, we should make Control C delete the deployment. If that makes sense, right? We should catch the Control C and delete
that. Does make sense.
Because that's really useful, right? The like, oh crap, like kill is a pretty common reaction.
Yeah, we'll probably need 2 different modes for that. One is like attached, where kubectl is actually running while you're doing it, and the other is unattached, which is what we envision a lot of use cases to want.
Yeah, for sure. But if you are running rolling update.
So here we see it has scaled up Redis RC to 3 and the old Nginx to scale down to 0. And when I do describe, I can see like my old RC and new RC, and I see it has updated all the 3 replicas which it had to.
And does it delete the old replica RC eventually?
No, it just scales it down to 0.
Are we going to support a mode where it deletes it?
Yes, eventually we will. So,
And are we going to support replace semantics also? Like rolling update right now has replace.
Like
on the
rename?
replication controller?
Yeah, I
No.
think we should.
We can have a discussion about that. But so deployment is intended to be the stable resource, and people shouldn't actually muck.
Okay, so
Or
you're
even ever
intending
see-
to hide the replication controller in the same way that we hide pods.
Yes.
Hide replication.
Yes.
Okay. Reasonable.
So there are a lot of
I guess we should
things.
support updates instead of delete and recreate.
Yeah, so Janet will show edit as well, which is like a better way to edit a deployment. So yeah, now Janet can show.
Yeah, and so one issue with this is I will also need to support rollover, because every time someone pushes a change to deployment, it needs to kick off a new rollout, and there may already been rollouts in progress.
Were there complaints about the audio there? I didn't quite see. I saw some chat.
Because when you talk,
Yeah, we're kind of behind the laptop. That was part of the reason to put the laptop up at the beginning is, or up at the front is because then we're all facing the laptop.
I had some really bad audio issues, but it was when I was going through HDMI to my monitor. So, like, I don't know what's going on. But when I'm with the headphones going through the audio card, it's all good now. So I don't know if other people were having those issues.
No, it was just that sound from behind the laptop that's recording is poor volume.
Brian and I will lean into the laptop if we're going to talk. Any questions before we move on to the edit? Any questions about that from people? We can't see the chat, so people should feel free to just talk.
Sorry, guys. This is Gabe here from the Data Safe. So I had a question. Are the deployments designed to handle like multiple canaries? So if we want to just drop something, an RC that's going to handle 10% of traffic and see how it goes, and then kind of can it, or do some A/B on it. Is that kind of the use case, or is it really just transitioning from one RC to another?
Yeah, so we do, right now it doesn't support canary, but we do want to support that. So we'll add another parameter that it actually pauses after updating a few, like a percentage of those pods. And then you can do your thing, like you want to check and verify a few things and then continue that deployment later.
Yeah, so there are really two different modes that people tend to use. One is what Nikhil described, where you think you want to roll it out, but you want some period of sort of testing it on a subset. The other is just having multiple release tracks indefinitely, like having one track that revs every time you get a green build, and another track that is the bulk of your capacity that is a more stable, running more stable release. So for that latter category, we would just imagine that you would run multiple deployments, right? That are just updated independently.
But we do want to have the ability to pause, right? Pause without killing.
Yeah, that's yes.
And just the question, because to sort of expand on Gabe's question a little bit, but we don't anticipate having more than 2 replication controllers. Is that right?
No.
So you could have a deployment that has 3 or 4 or 5.
We anticipate always having one desired state. You may have multiple intermediate states because people made a bunch of rapid changes to it.
Right. But we don't anticipate having like ABC experiments, say, for example.
No.
Okay.
One desired state.
Yeah, desired state.
Any other questions from people?
So if this is a Kubernetes deployment, how do we talk about deployments of Kubernetes?
We'll probably rename it.
The deployment object, that is, not the
Yes.
deployment of Kubernetes. We'll rename Kubernetes to deployment. Anything else? Going.
Is there an open issue that discusses what would be needed to evolve this to make it an official V1 style API?
don't think there is a specific issue addressing exactly that.
I guess I'm wondering if there's known gaps that we want to fill prior to marking it V1.
There are known gaps, yes.
But
Okay.
maybe it makes sense to create a roll-up bug that contains all of those bugs.
Yeah, that's fine.
We should definitely have issues filed for all of the things you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then
So
we should
that-
probably have a roll, and I assume they are.
Yeah.
And then we should have a roll-up that people can look at if they want to understand what's going on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Also, I don't think we have a transition plan for how we bring APIs out of experimental, do we?
That is a topic. The transition plan for graduating APIs from experimental is a topic of discussion later today, I think. We do actually have a proposal that we're going to discuss and hash out a little bit. In particular, we're going to discuss how it impacts GKE, but definitely the proposal is being discussed in an issue on GitHub, so I can dig up the number.
Joe,
Was your going once, twice for the whole meeting or just for this topic?
oh no, just for this topic. Sorry.
Okay, I will shut up then.
Yeah, we have more demos to do still. So
All right, cool.
Okay, so now we have this deployment, and if we look at its YAML file, you can see the image is Redis. So now, say I want to change it back to Nginx, then instead of doing what we did earlier by Nikhil, we can just use the edit. So I call add kubectl edit deployment, and we'll bring up this YAML file, and I can just edit it. I'll edit this to Nginx. Change the name as well, and then save. And now it will show that deployment is edited. So if we look at the YAML file again, you can see that the image is changed to Nginx. And we can now look at the RC.
So now what it will is, it will again adopt back the old RC which it had scaled down, and it will start scaling up, and it will scale down the Redis RC. So now we see Nginx was at 0, it's now scaling that up. So it's at 1 now. And it will
So
scale
this
down
one
Redis.
is the new one.
So this is like essentially rolling back the last deployment.
How do you cancel an edit? Can you cancel an edit?
If I don't change anything, I think.
It won't.
Yeah.
It won't actually do the post.
Yeah.
Okay. So it hashes it or it does something to figure out that the edit hasn't changed, that the data hasn't changed, and it stops doing it. Well, like it's one thing if it like pushes a copy of the same thing, but it's another thing if it like imagine someone so multiple people in the same room. Imagine I get like a long way in. Sorry, I delete the whole thing, or I do lots and lots of stuff with it. Right? I can't actually bring it back. Right? And so if I quit without saving, what happens?
If I quit without saving, then nothing happens.
Okay.
You only patch the change after you save the file.
Okay.
And if you did something wrong, like the syntax error, or you change the fields that you shouldn't change, you will also not patch the change.
All right. Cool.
So it will validate first.
Yeah.
So lunch. That's really early lunch. Yeah. I might close my mail.
So now it's successfully updated to Nginx, and we can try to do some wrong edit. Like if I change the
How does it decide what to clear also? It has to clear like creation timestamp and stuff like that.
No.
Oh, you
No?
don't.
That stuff gets cleared in the API server.
Oh, okay.
Right. So in the future,
We might want to do that anyway, just for like.
well, yeah. So in the future, OpenShift actually has an operation called export, which clears a bunch of fields. We're probably going to need to implement export. They implement it in the client. We'll probably implement it in the server and then use that to populate this.
What happens if you change something you shouldn't change? Like I don't know.
Yeah.
If you change,
That's what she was going to demo.
if you change the UID.
If I name to a new name, then I save. It'll say show an error message that this shouldn't be changed, and you'll copy what you just changed to this place.
How does it figure that out?
Use the he will verify the syntax that plays out the YAML syntax.
But that's valid YAML syntax.
But this is
Oh, this one
that's
is
server
the-
side validation, right? Of the
Yeah.
patch.
This is the other function that
Okay.
can set several fields that you shouldn't change.
So this is server-side validation. Is that right? That's server-side validation then?
Oh, that's client side. Oh.
Okay, so that's just manually specified for an object? How does
Yeah, for now it's
we
Just
should,
let the server do that.
Yeah. So
yeah,
Swagger.
although you have a reasonable point, which is that like if you change the UUID, if it's cleared on the way in prior to validation, I bet it'll just be like, yep, I'm good.
We should.
Yeah,
we
it
should.
gets
We should print
clear
everything
in
in
the
the
API
client,
server.
and the server should reject it if you change it.
Right. So yeah. So we should clear stuff that you can't set here.
No. We should show this the actual settings.
No,
No,
we should not.
no, because like what happens if I edit UUID? I can make UUID be foobar, right? And I think that I've changed it at some level, right? And I say go, and it's gonna go to the server, and the server's gonna say, "Yep, good job," and it's not gonna actually change anything, and so that's gonna violate like
Don't you have the same problem if you leave it blank though?
I need to speak in.
Sorry. If you leave it blank, at least you're not motivated to change it. Right?
So it's actually totally fine to leave things blank because what this is actually doing is a patch.
Right.
So, the right thing to do would be to strip out everything that the user can't set and shouldn't care about. So the idea is that, some export like operation, which should be implemented server side, would do that, right? Some special flavor of get, basically.
Yeah. I'm focused on the UID because we had a bug where the UID couldn't get updated.
Okay.
And then what was I also thinking about with regards to this? Oh, I think that, and this was discussed in a separate bug, we should extend the YAML codec to generate comments based on the description field that is in the Golang tag. It would not be that hard to do. So that, because we already have when you do this, it's useful to know what these things mean, right? And YAML supports comments, right? And so we can grab that field out of the tag, out of the Go object tag, and then just shove it into a comment above the field.
Right. Yeah, there are some other things we want to do along those lines as well. Like there's another issue where we've discussed adding a new command.
Yeah.
And the new
That's what I
command
was
would
reading
pull
about.
actually an example template back from the API server, and that could have handwritten curated comments or.
Right. But I mean, the
it could
description
do
should
this.
be that, right? In theory.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And because concretely, I would actually like to integrate edit with kubectl run and kubectl expose, so that you can say kubectl run -- edit, and it'll do its whole generator thing. But then instead of just shoving it to the server, it'll kick it up in an editor for you to manually. And that way, we don't have to add 20 billion flags to support every
Yep.
possible
No,
thing.
that's a good idea as well.
So, but to do that, I think having the descriptions would make that super useful because.
Yeah, file issues.
Oh yeah, no. Yes,
All good ideas.
all right, cool.
Just
Anything else? Any questions on this?
just what we need is more good ideas.
Yeah, and we actually have a lot of ideas in this space. If you're interested in working on this, let us know. We have lots of stuff for people to do.
And it's also relatively light touch, right? You can make changes in kubectl, unless you go near the resource builder, which is its whole can of worms. But other than that, it's relatively easy to make changes in kubectl. So it's a good way to kind of get your feet wet. Anything else? Cool. Do we have anything else on the agenda?
Yeah, Jack has a demo.
Oh, all right, Jack.
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm just getting that together. I had some logistical challenges making it to the meeting here. The meeting room that was on the invite was someone's staff meeting, which I walked into.
Oh yes, sorry about that. We moved it from Friday. That's our fault. We need to fix their rooms.
Give me a couple of minutes here and I'll get this ready.
Joe, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the topic of sort of reporting status from the SIGs, because we've been holding regular meetings on the scaling stuff, and just was wondering if we want to start a pattern or a schedule of, active SIGs giving updates.
That would be great. How about we do that? I don't know. How long is it going to take you to set up, Jack?
Oh, 5 minutes.
Okay, you want to go ahead, Joe?
Yeah, let me pull up my notes here, see if I can restore tabs until it shows up. Come on, come on, come on. No.
This is why I didn't.
I got all sorts of. All right, so give me a second. I'll race you, Jack. We'll see.
Sounds good. Okay.
All right. Anything else while we have a moment? I can juggle. Maybe Daniel and I can pass.
Yeah, fine, dog. All right, so the scale SIGs, I got my notes up. So Quentin's going to be recording some stuff that'll be shared inside of Google. We'll figure out if we can actually record those meetings and share that stuff more publicly. I think we've been using Hangout still, but we switched to a Google-hosted Hangout, which has a higher limit. So the Samsung guys, and I know I think Bob's on the line here, have been running large-scale tests, and 100 and 1,000 nodes, and they've been seeing some performance issues that the Google folks haven't been seeing. And so a lot of the focus has been on sort of capturing the state of a config and whether it's conformant to some sort of definition of conformant or not. And so a lot of effort has been going into trying and verify that it's a good config. One of the ideas coming out of that was, and Daniel just filed an issue on this, is to have some way to sort of dump a config of a cluster. So you can go up to a cluster and say, give me everything you know about this cluster in some sort of stick it in a gist or be able to diff it so that you can figure out. And this is sort of a half step to getting to one config file for the whole cluster as input, right? Being able to at least get all the command line flags, all the things that's useful is going to be useful for debugging a cluster and being able to figure out if there's problems. And then the Samsung guys have been running density tests, and they've been looking at the sort of the startup time for the density test to bring up 5, 10, 30 pods per node at the 100 and 1,000 node sizes. The Samsung tests have been running on AWS, so that might be some of the difference. I know that the Red Hat folks have been running some scale tests also and haven't seen some of the same issues here. So we're trying to get to the bottom here. In V106, they're seeing about 10 pods a second scheduled. The theory is that you're not going to get any faster than that without moving the scheduler to be less serialized. And Daniel has some ideas there, but we want to get some other issues figured out before we start really tuning that. There might be some rate limits in there also. With head, though, we're seeing things be significantly slower. I don't have the numbers, but the pattern looks like the pods are getting submitted fine. And once the scheduler binds them to a node, that kubelet is picking it up and applying that fine. But something's going on in the Samsung setup that isn't being seen with GCE head, where it looks like the scheduler is working in batches and taking some big pauses in between. And so the graphs there look like they're stair stepping. So you may see some chatter about stair stepping, and that's what we're talking about there. Some discussion on sort of is 10 pods a second, good enough or not. the thinking is that with some CI/CD pipelines, we may end up with some very bursty workloads where people want to schedule a lot of stuff at once. So eventually, we're going to probably want to push that number and get faster there. It depends on sort of how fast we can get without making some significant changes to the scheduler. And then, and so that's sort of a summary of where some of these things are at. The idea here is that once we understand what's going on with the Samsung cluster, we can start, tuning stuff for a large cluster, figure out where the bugs are, and eventually perhaps, post something with real numbers that we're confident that that's, numbers that we're proud of, after we get some of these issues figured out. So quick summary there. Hopefully you're ready, Jack.
I'm ready.
Track the thing that Wojtek sent.
So my understanding is that the thing that Wojtek did was kubelets, after they actually start a pod running, having some latency and reporting that back.
Yeah.
The stuff the Samsung guys have seen is actually latency in terms of the scheduler taking a pod that's been submitted, scheduling it, and turning it into a bound pod. Okay. So it's a different part of the pipeline. It's either a problem, some sort of n-squaredy type of thing going on in the scheduler. It seems to be exacerbated when they started putting resource constraints on pods, or some plumbing is getting clogged up someplace and stuff have to reset, right? And you're doing some sort of n-squaredy.
Everything should
type
have
of
resource constraints. If they're using the default admission control, everything, no matter what, should have resource constraints.
Yes.
So that.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. That's a good point.
But I mean, that would be the sort of thing that might be captured because, of course, admissions controllers are flags to the API server, and so
the default.
So I think the problem right now there, Brendan, is that the limit range is, I don't know if they're spinning up their cluster using the salt stuff or not.
They're not using salt. They're using a combination of Terraform and some other stuff.
Yeah, so the salt stuff is what's adding the default limit range into the
right, and that's only for the default namespace, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If they have the concern, they can remove that object, right?
Well, no, the concern is that they're not enforcing, they're not actually using it.
Yeah, well,
I don't understand the issue. It's that they're putting too many pods on a machine because they're not using the range.
What?
Of course, what I suggest, just validate this. Yeah. It's the simple validation, right? So that will affect their increase their scheduler latency or not. It's really easy.
But it really shouldn't.
You really shouldn't. I
can't think of a good reason why.
So now to be clear, Samsung's also hitting issues as they go above 30 pods per node, with an idea of getting to higher and higher density on a particular node. Red Hat's not hitting some of these same issues. And the failure mode there is one of seeing some random EOFs and things seem to really fall over in a sort of bad way. So at some point, it makes sense to try and make sure that there's some sort of sane failure mode when you try and cram too many pods on a single node. I think, there's indication that something gets overloaded, starts timing out, and sort of everything kind of falls apart at that.
What Dawn saw, right, was that the Docker daemon just chews up all the memory and things start ooming.
Yeah, can we file the issue so we can help them to look at? So,
yeah, I mean, that's not their focus right now. They want to sort of scale out the cluster, and then at some point they'll really want to start focusing on density on a single node. But definitely file the. Let's start collecting data there.
Hold on. Because there's some expected. Some people also recently filed the issue about the overcommit node. But then based on what they are doing, that's kind of expected behavior. Yeah. So just file issue, then we can look into those things, collect data.
Okay. Well, I'll encourage them to file something there.
I'll just say this. This is Bob.
Oh, Bob. Okay, great.
We've just been a little bit cautious about opening things like this, just because we want to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row and we have all the conformance tests working, and that we haven't done something foolish on the way. So that's the only reason we haven't opened it already.
Well, if you want to sort of lower touch, I mean, if you don't want to do something public, feel free to send mail to anyone on the Google side directly, and we can communicate, even if you want some basic
No, I think maybe we could just use some advice, just sort of expectation setting about should we be aggressive about opening these kinds of tickets, even if we're not 100% lined up on our internal reproducibility and so forth? Or,
I mean, we don't want to generate noise, right? Like everything you file is going to be somebody's going to take it seriously and they're going to try and investigate it. And so
that's why we will definitely.
But at the same time, like if Dawn, I mean, Dawn has a strong experience here, right? And so if she can help and say like, have you tried looking at these 4 things and it may help you get over a hurdle, that's worth doing, right? Rather than having you relearn everything that she already knows. Right?
Okay.
Feel free to send an email direct to me.
All right. Yeah, you're creating noise was really what we were concerned about. So we'll make sure we don't do that. But otherwise, thanks.
Okay, all set for a demo here?
Sounds good.
All right, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Hopefully this will work out okay. Please tell me if you can see this terminal.
Yes.
Good, all right. So if we look at the cluster that's running right now, you'll see that there's no replication controllers on it. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and create the Redis master controller using the guestbook example.
Jack, can you tell us what you're about to tell us about before you tell us what it is?
Oh, well, thank you for that reminder. Yes, I'm going to show you something called diff and patch, otherwise known as apply. So far, all I've done is create a replication controller. What I'm going to do is apply a patch to it by doing a diff with a new config. And the whole idea here is that the user is keeping around a bunch of configuration files. And they want to be able to just edit those files and push the changes in those files into the cluster. They don't want to have to manually construct a patch, right? So what this does, it's called kubectl apply. It's Brian's brainchild. What it does essentially is take your new config, diff it with your existing config, compute a strategic merge patch, just like the one that Janet demoed, and then apply that to the object. That make sense? I'll take that as a yes. Okay. One of the interesting things about this is that it has to know what the previous configuration was in order to come up with that diff. So here I've just created a replication controller. And if I go and fetch it, you'll notice that there's an annotation on it. That's this annotation right here. What happens is when you make a change to the configuration of a resource via kubectl, whether that's via create or via replace or edit or run or expose or any of those pathways, this annotation will be placed on the object, capturing its current user-specified config. This allows us to diff with what the user asked for the previous time so we can determine what they've removed, what they've added, what they've changed. Okay. So that's the way the RC looks at the moment. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a patch to that, which I'm going to show you here first. Whoops, not what I wanted. So this is the patch. You can see here that there's a role master label that's been removed, right? And a new label that's been put in its place, test key, test value. So we should see the removal of the existing role master and the addition of the test key, test value label in all 3 locations when we apply this new configuration. Any questions there? Okay. So what we'll do is go ahead and apply this. And the syntax for apply is just like the syntax for create. You do a kubectl apply -f if you like from a file, or you could do standard in. And it simply takes the new configuration, diffs it with the existing one, by pulling the object from the server, pulling out the annotation and doing the diff and computing the patch. And then it sends that patch over the wire to update the object. So at this point, we've now configured this replication controller with the new config. And so now if we go and fetch it again, we'll see that its labels have been updated as expected, right? And the annotation has been updated to show what we just supplied as the user's intent. So the next apply will compare with this. And that's pretty much what I had to demo there. Questions? I hear somebody typing like that.
Do we, what do you do with resource version if there's concurrent applies?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What do you do with resource version if there are concurrent applies?
That's a good question. Currently, it's not reading or writing the resource version.
Currently, this uses patch, and currently patch does not have a resource version-based precondition in the API server.
Okay.
We have sporadic random failures because behind the scenes, API server would do a get.
They just fixed this. I mean, so
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, so that fixes this pointless failures, but it doesn't fix the ability to specify a precondition.
But it's also going to break this, right? Because you're going to compute both of your patches will eventually succeed, right?
So in general, if you have multiple people changing stuff with patch, yeah, it's problematic.
All right.
Yeah, don't do that.
All right, so maybe we should have like a,
We should really just add resource.
So I mean, the basic fundamental problem, if someone goes and updates something which conflicts with the config, whether it's another apply or some other kind of update,
right,
you're not going to be happy. So we have an issue filed about figure out what users are going to want with respect to conflict detection.
Right.
Right. So my take is, if that happens, we should have a way of detecting it and convey some kind of error to the user. Almost certainly it's a screw up. And the user wants the config to actually look like their file. Right? So on the other hand, if someone else made a change which conflicts with that, then that's most likely
and that's a fairly that's a fairly low-hanging piece of fruit from here, because we already are in a position where we can diff the existing version of the object with the patch being applied and detect conflicts. So currently, the way this is implemented, there is a force flag. It doesn't do anything because it always forces, but dropping in the conflict detection should be a fairly straightforward operation from here.
And this, of course, begs the question of we're going to want autofills at some point. Right? Like, with the replication controller in general, if you marry this up with a autoscaler, then bad stuff is going to happen.
No, actually,
right?
this is designed to perfectly handle that case. You can delegate fields to other things to set. If you don't set them in your file, they're open to be set by any other thing. So you would just not specify replicas here, and everything would be happy.
But then if you manually, okay, but then that means that if you want this to actually work correctly,
and what Jack also happens.
I guess that'll work, right? Okay.
Yeah. This is actually very carefully designed in that regard.
What is in like scale? It'll interact with scale. Well.
Yeah, so Jack actually went through and also, so let's say you specified it in your file, and someone else goes and does scale. I believe Jack made a change that it updates the annotation. There's still the issue of how you need to go back and update the file, otherwise it's going to scale it.
What if you don't specify in your file first and then you scale? So
that's the intended way you're supposed to use it.
Okay. And it'll never appear.
It will never
it only
appear.
puts it in if it's already there.
That's right.
Okay, on a scale.
Yeah.
Are the semantics described in a doc somewhere?
No, not really. There's kubectl apply documentation, but it's thin. You know, it doesn't give a lot of rich description. So that's
the discussion is in the issue, but yes, I have commented multiple times that it needs to get put in a doc. So it will get put in a doc.
Yeah. Because it sounds a little like it sounds like you guys thought of all the corner cases, but like it would be good to communicate those to people because it sounds like there's a lot of corner cases.
That's an excellent point. There was a lot of discussion on the issue threads. Sam Goads in particular, Clayton was involved. So yeah, we need to tease out all that good discussion and distill it down into a nice document and make it available.
And also, I mean, the other complexity here, of course, is that this isn't going to play nice with third-party client libraries unless we do the right thing, right? Like,
right. So that's been
in some ways we're trusting third-party client libraries to.
That's been a larger concern. The real solution here, it seems to me anyway, is to actually have a configuration resource.
That doesn't solve the problem either, because if you have things which are directly modifying the resources, then they have the same problem. Yeah. So fundamentally, the way this is designed is the user has to decide what scope, what things they actually want to configure using this mechanism, and they specify those. And everything else is reserved to be updated by other systems or tools, right? So that is, so, you know, if you want to use scale to scale, or you want to use an auto scaler to scale, or you want a vertical auto sizer, or you want to have your own custom scheduler or to set the node field or whatever, all of those things are possible. Oh, yeah. Don't specify them in your config. And whether it's through apply or through, you know, something like deployment manager, then it doesn't really matter. It's the same problem.
That's true. That said, I think there's an opportunity for us to do something interesting with a configuration resource and do this on the server side, where you push a config and then have it made so, right? So that I'll write up a little proposal on that. It's probably the best way to handle that.
Do we want to? I mean, I'm a little bit also worried with kubectl about the fact that we now have kubectl update with kubectl patch and we have kubectl apply, which are more or less the same thing.
They're actually different.
I mean, I know they're subtly different. No, I know that they're subtly different.
It's more than subtly different, but yes, we
need to.
We have a section of the user guide that discusses how to update stuff. And yes, right now it says in this situation use replace, in this situation use patch, in this situation use rolling update. The reason we did all these demos together is because together they make a pretty compelling user story about how you can update everything declaratively. Right? So you can specify your deployment using the deployment API, and then you can, if you don't want to keep a pile of files in Git or whatever for your configuration, you can just use edit to update it, and it just happens. And it does the rolling update. You don't need to think about doing different kinds of update. You can always just use edit. On the other hand, if you do want to keep a set of configuration files and maintain those in source control or whatever, you can do that and always use apply. And it's just fully declarative, and you can always use the same command, and it just works. Right?
So may I suggest that somebody write the chapter of the book necessary to actually explain this to users?
Right, exactly. Like, I think that the problem isn't necessarily in the fact that, yeah, it's that if I say man kubectl or I say kubectl help, like, I'm going to see 4 different things where the verb basically says the same thing.
It's very thin. The help is very thin.
And I would imagine that you know, if we imagine that there's 3 different ways that you can do this, we write a chapter that says, hey, if you want to manage your configuration, here's the 3 different ways that you can manage this configuration. Right. If you're doing it with this style, you use these tools. If you're doing it with this style, you use these tools. Here's how you convert from one to the other if you've decided that you want to upgrade. Like that very cookbook sort of like, I'm a dumbass, what do I need to do to get started here? Yeah. Getting that documentation would I think really help. And it might suggest better names for this, better ways to actually present this in the tools, that type of thing.
Yeah, so there is a chapter in the user guide about this. It's called Managing Deployments. And, you know, feel free to send PRs to that.
Yes.
What I'm suggesting here, Brian, though, is that before stuff like this gets checked in, somebody actually goes through and thinks about this from the point of view of what is the user experience around this stuff. Just, you know, throwing some stuff into kubectl with a couple of paragraphs of help inside of kubectl is not, you know, going to get Kubernetes where it needs to be in terms of user experience. But that's just my take. I think it's a larger issue, but I don't want to derail the stuff here.
So agreed regarding the documentation, Joe. And to Brian's point, you know, this should go into the user guide in the chapter that's already there. I just want to also make a footnote for those that don't know that we've been working on an open source version of GCP Deployment Manager, and we have that now running in Kubernetes. It's written in Go and Python. And that allows you to have parameterized templates and to define types in terms of templates. And it's pretty sweet. So when that's fully online, we'll have an even richer deployment story, all declarative. And at that point, the documentation that you're describing, Joe, is going to be really important. Not that it isn't already, but even more then.
I would also just encourage, I think that we don't have room to experiment inside of kubectl right now. And I think that just like with API, I know we've talked about this, but we should probably be able to have experimental commands versus, so that because I actually disagree with Joe in the sense that I don't think we should block building stuff on writing docs. I do think we should be able to put up big fences that tell people when they're off in, there might be dragons here land.
Yeah, so
that seems a reasonable compromise.
OpenShift has an experimental.
Yeah, we have experimental as a
Right. And I think something like that, where you kick on an experimental flag, or we even have a kubectl-experimental symlink that is different, will help keep the complexity away from people until we figured out exactly how to present it.
Yeah, Clayton or someone else from the OpenShift side, do you want to say something about how you use the experimental command group?
Yeah, so this is Derek. We have an experimental subgroup, and I think our first experimental subcommand was to make it easier to create a secret, and but there might be a few others I don't know off the top of my head. But generally, it's been where we have an intern that joins the project and we want them to go write something, and we say do it in experimental first, and then we give it a closer look afterwards. But oftentimes it's a good place to just see something that's been an issue and try to prove it out.
Right. So the secret bundle secret in particular was changed significantly.
Correct.
When it was moved out of experimental, right? It was completely renamed and stuff. So that is the reason to start with experimental.
Yeah. And likewise, I think as we grow in functionality, we should think carefully about how we maybe want to package or sub-package command groups together to make things hold together seamlessly. Also, concretely from a GKE standpoint and GC in general standpoint, we need to get the tab completions that we've done so much work on actually working. So I shouldn't say we have done so much work. Red Hat has done so much work. Because that'll also help with people trying to explore. So, all right, cool. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Any other concerns?
Hey, Brendan, this is Paul. I wanted to give a brief update on the volume security stuff that we've been doing.
Okay.
So the driver for this work has been mostly making volumes work correctly for pods that are running containers that run as a non-zero or non-root UID. And we have 3 proposals for this. The first one is about inlining the fields of the container level security context into a new pod security context that holds attributes that necessarily apply to all containers in a pod, like, do I want to use the host network namespace? Do I want to use the host IPC namespace? And then also holding container level attributes that we want to apply to the entire, or to all containers in a pod. The second is about introducing a new FS group field to the pod security context that will be the group that owns all of the volumes that support ownership management from the client side. So that's everything derived from mtdir, like secrets, downward API, Git repo, etc. And then the block device file systems, when they're used in a exclusive mode, I think the mode is actually called read write once. And the third is about generalizing support for SE Linux so that volumes that support it can be isolated from one another using SE Linux. So as opposed to the current support that we have for SE Linux, which is basically if SE Linux is enforcing on a node, we'll attempt to give mtdir volumes only right now a usable SE Linux context from a Docker container, but we won't isolate containers volumes from one another. This third proposal is about adding that SE Linux isolation from between volumes that belong to different pods. So 2 of those, the first 2 landed that week. Tim and Brian have spent a lot of time reviewing them, and I thank you guys both for that. The last remaining one is the SE Linux one, which I'm hoping we'll be entering LGTM status shortly. And then myself and Sammy on the Red Hat storage team are going to be working on implementing this stuff. So I will put the numbers into the chat because I've been told recently that discussing things by their PR number is not the best user experience. But their 12823 is the first one. The next one for the FS group is 12944. And last but certainly not least, the SE Linux one is 14192. Thanks a lot.
Cool. Thanks. We're about to lose our room, but I think I saw Bob had something you wanted to say, and then if there's anything last
well, we were a few minutes late, so if you covered it at the beginning, I apologize. But I think, perhaps we didn't have enough time, but what's going on with 1.1 and blocking issues? By the way, I'll just parenthetically suggest that maybe a release SIG might be a good forum. Just a thought.
Okay.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Yeah, so I would say the status is what it was before. It's been cut. We're getting EDE on it. We're going to let it soak. There have been a few cherry picks to it. There will continue to be cherry picks to it. That's not much status, I guess, beyond that. Well, still on track for mid-October.
I guess my request would be that the release status should really be something that we hit every meeting, at least briefly. And
okay.
I'd love to see more updates on the mailing list around the release status also.
Okay.
Because I can't always make the meeting, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people.
I think mailing list is actually better, so I will attempt to do a release status mail to the mailing list every week. All right.